How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
You guys ready to start?
It started. We're on it right now.
We're recording.
People see Todd floating across the screen. Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's a podcast dedicated to the history and evolution of cult and genre movies. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
I'm Justin Bishop. We're joined today by writer-comedian, and I don't have a other clever thing to call you this week because I forgot to do that. Todd
okay.
Davis,
That's all right.
welcome to the show.
Do we still
everybody.
have to do that every time he shows up now? He's just here. Do we
Nope,
just call him podcaster Todd Davis?
No, writer, comedian, and
Swell guy.
swell guy. That's it.
Pretty swell.
Sure. Yeah, pretty swell. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thanks for showing up, Todd. Thank you for showing up. Hey, guys.
It's off
This
to a
is
strong
week,
start.
This is week 6, I think, of our Tom Savini, George Romero series. Does that sound right? Week 6?
Sure
We're
so.
over halfway through this series where we're exploring the collaborations between George A. Romero and Tom Savini. One of the greatest, I don't know, I think it's one of the, legit one of the greatest, at least in the horror genre, collaborations in history, in film history.
I think
Is
that's
that
fair.
is that hyperbolic of me to say, or do you guys
I
agree
don't think
with that?
so. They're the Lennon and McCartney of gore.
Yeah, well, yeah, I like that. I like that description. Which one's which?
I would say they're more the OGs because I think things have definitely progressed since then. But yeah, they're kind of the grandfathers.
Sounds like it's like a bit of a backhanded compliment there, Todd.
I'm just saying like it kind of kicked off with those guys.
I feel like it's backwards, but I would go Savini is Lennon and Romero is McCartney is how I would picture it.
Yeah, except
Because-
Lennon's dead, like George Romero.
Oh, well,
Oh.
there's a little wrinkle in the plan. I was just going to say Romero seems like the laid back, like nice guy, and Tom Savini looks like
seems
he'd
nice.
fuck your wife.
Oh yeah, he would. You guys ready to get on with this?
I'm on it.
Yeah.
I'm getting it on.
So Tom Savini has, if you listen to him in interviews, he credits 2 movies as the movies that sort of made his career. The first, of course, is a movie we talked about a couple weeks ago, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. But as a result of that movie, he got the job on the second movie that he credits as kind of kickstarting his career, which was 1980's Friday the 13th. Now, with the 1-2 punch of those 2 movies, he was kind of solidified as the go-to guy for gore effects during the golden age of 80s horror. After Friday the 13th, he went on to create the gore for Maniac, for Eyes of a Stranger, The Burning, The Prowler. These are all movies that we kind of skipped. We didn't really go over in this series or talk about his work on them because, you know, they're not George Romero movies, and we're sort of focusing specifically on that collaboration. But they're still very important milestones in his career, I think, and I'm sure we'll talk about all of those at some point in the near future.
Nice. Yeah.
Right now.
I'm looking forward to that because I mean I've heard of Maniac. I don't know that I've ever actually watched Maniac.
Well, it is fun.
It is fun.
It's not, I mean, fun may not be the word, but
If you can watch the Joe Bob version's fun.
it's uncomfortable sometimes.
It is. It's a dark movie. The remake's really good too.
Yes.
I think I saw a good bit of the remake.
That's Frodo.
A good bit. You just didn't finish it. You just started watching it and didn't finish it.
Yeah, I just didn't finish it.
Oh, not feeling this. I've seen better.
So while he would continue to create gore effects over the years, in 1982 he worked on a film that gave him a chance to really kind of stretch his legs creatively. He worked not only on the gore effects, but he was able to work on this movie on the kind of creature effects that guys like Rob Bottin and Rick Baker would be known for. Of course, Rob Bottin already kind of becoming known for at the time that this movie came out. And that film, which was, of course, directed by George Romero and written by none other than Stephen King, and the subject of today's episode is the classic horror anthology Creepshow.
Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. You'll scream at ghastly ghouls. Cringe at weird kids. And shiver at the doings of evil doctors.
This is going to be extremely painful, Mr. Verrill.
Creepshow will grab you, grow on you, and give you the creeps.
Meteor shit.
It's an A+ line reading, I think. Not you, Gary. I mean, yours was fine, but Mr. Stephen King's line reading of that is chef's kiss. I'm doing the chef's kiss emoji right now. You can't see that as you listen to this podcast, and that's what's going on.
Stephen King does a fantastic job just all around in just delivering a performance, avant-garde, just something.
We'll get into that. We'll get into Stephen King's performance during this episode. Don't worry. But first, we're going to give a little backstory on this one. So I thought about maybe this is the first time we've done a horror anthology movie. Even on our old podcast, Gary, I don't think we ever did an anthology film. And it's kind of a tricky one to tackle because it's essentially an anthology movie is essentially multiple short films just, smushed together. So I thought about us, maybe tackling kind of the history of the horror anthology or something along those lines. But I figured there will be plenty of time for that in the future. Maybe we'll do a Mario Bava movie and talk about some really old school horror anthology films. But instead, what I want to do here before we get into the making of Creepshow is I want to talk a little bit about the history of EC Comics. Todd, as a comic guy, this might be of interest to you. And there's a lot here that I'm not going to have time to get into. The history of EC Comics is tied into the history of comic books, period, in ways that we're going to talk about, but also in ways that we won't be able to get into. But essentially, the guy who founded EC Comics made the very first comic book ever. He was the first guy who took like comic strips and compiled them into a book, if that makes sense. So essentially what we think of as the comic book.
Yeah, comics were essentially just a way for, the smaller print companies, especially, post Great Depression, to basically double their profits.
Yeah. So Entertaining Comics, more commonly known as EC Comics, was founded in 1944, and they specialized in horror, crime, dark fantasy, and science fiction comics throughout the 40s and all the way through the mid-1950s. Oddly enough, though, it originally specialized in educational books. EC originally stood for Educational Comics. And so they focused on educational books or stories that were targeted at kids. But after the original owner, Maxwell Gaines, was killed in a boating accident in 1947, his son William took over, and that's when it really started to kind of delve into genres like horror, sci-fi, war, etc. And Maxwell Gaines, William Gaines, the son, originally didn't have any interest in comic books or publishing at all. He went to like dental school or something boring, but he got into this because he inherited it basically. So he took this fledgling comic book company and kind of looked at the trends that were going on and decided he would focus on different genres, on genres that he thought would sell. And the stories in these EC Comics, they were known for their shock endings. Think of, what Twilight Zone would later do, only to a greater extent that couldn't be shown on television. And also for their social consciousness. They often tackled progressive themes like racial equality, nuclear disarmament. There were anti-war stories, environmentalism, things that you normally didn't see in comic books at the time. I mean, most of the time when you saw a war comic, it was sort of these jingoistic, like praising the soldiers as heroes, whereas the
Cat
EC
punches
comics,
a Jap.
right? Yeah. Whereas the EC comics would show the after effects of the trauma of war, things that you know were pretty heavy at the time. I mean, these were being published during World War II for a good part of the time. Those war comics and a variety of other genres they kind of became known for, but it was the horror books that they did that really became notorious. There was Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror, The Haunt of Fear. These all became incredibly popular with younger readers at the time, but they weren't so popular with those readers' parents. So in the late 1940s, the comic book industry became the target of public criticism for their content and the effect that a lot of people thought that content would have on kids. And like I said, there's a lot of history here that we're not really going to have the time to get into. But what this whole movement sort of led to was the publication of a book called The Seduction of the Innocent. It was written by a psychiatrist named Dr. Frederick Wortham, and it sort of warned about the negative effects of comic books and how they were a major cause of juvenile delinquency. That was his thought. Then in 1954, that's the same year that this book was published, there was also a highly publicized congressional hearing on juvenile delinquency, and comic books were a big part of that discussion. There's a lot of yada, yada, yada in between each of these points that I'm making, but this basically led to a federal investigation and a shakeup in the entire comic book industry.
Now,
there were distributors that would no longer distribute comic books.
So just a real quick fun story about the book, The Seduction of the Innocent. A few years ago, I was at the Heroes Convention, which is a big comic book convention in Charlotte, North Carolina. And a lot of times fans will bring, sketch pads and stuff, and they'll take them around to the artists because there's tons of artists at these things. And they'll ask every artist that's working there, hey, give me your version of Batman or give me your version of Spider-Man or whatever. One particular year, someone brought a really nice leather-bound hardback copy of Seduction of the Innocent and was passing it around to all the different artists saying, draw your most disgusting, pornographic, deviant thing you can think of in as much detail as you want. And I think at one point, and it was by the end of the weekend, there was one page that if you just set the book down, it would just open to this particular page because it had been viewed so much, and someone had just drawn a gigantic vagina with hair and a lot of detail, and it was really fun to see that at a show. But yeah, that's my fun little seduction of the. Yeah, it was really fun.
That's really
just
great.
like you can go back and look and see like some of these conversations that were going on at the time, and it's really crazy to think about. I mean, it goes back to stuff we talk about all the time with movies and everything too, with as far as sex and violence. Like it's okay to chop somebody's head off in a movie, but to show a titty or something, I don't know. Like it just there's these weird, or like language is okay, or I don't know. It's just like the weird, sometimes almost seemingly hypocritical views censorship takes that was going on here, where it's like I casually mentioned the Captain America thing where he's just like punching a Japanese guy, and that's the logo on the thing during World War II or something. Nobody saw that as like potentially like, well, hey, you're really, this could be problematic in some ways too. The spirit of America was behind it, so that was okay. But then, like horror comics were really offensive, and there's like literally a conversation I read between Gaines and like one of the senators or something, where they're talking about one of the covers, and it's a person with another person's head cut off, and so they're like, "Do you think this is tasteful?" And he's trying to, or he calls it. He's like, I did this as tastefully as possible. They're like, you call this tasteful? He's like, well, considering this is a story about a person that cuts another person's head off, yes, like I could have, and like trying to describe like what he could have done And I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to see them like have that conversation back and forth and just clearly want to bury this guy.
Well, there was I had the chance to a few years, quite a few years ago now, give a lecture, I guess, at a college in Florida where we were talking about the history of the comic book industry, and I was going through some of the World War II things that the positive stuff that came out of World War II, and then I had these books or these photos of Nazis burning books. And as I was flipping through those photos, I transitioned into photos of parents and National Guard soldiers burning stacks of comic books. And I let the audience sort of take that in of like, we came from defeating this one particular enemy only to sort of become that in that respect of destroying artwork, literature, just because it's supposedly offensive or causing kids to be kids, I suppose.
Yeah. If you're listening right now, you can imagine how awkward it is that right now on my Facebook page, there's a photo of all of us standing around burning Todd's comic book.
That's deserved. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So what happened due to all this backlash is that, and due to the fact that a lot of the distributors were, the whole distribution cycle was completely upended, sales plummeted in comic books, and a lot of companies went out of business. So Gaines, what he does, the owner of EC Comics, he calls together a meeting of his fellow publishers, suggesting that the comic book industry pull together to fight outside censorship, basically to self-censor so that the government couldn't have a hand in it. This has happened with movies as well. That's basically where the MPAA came from, with similar results. They basically were trying to repair the industry's reputation by saying, look, we're going to self-censor and we're going to make sure that, before something, we're going to make sure that we're the ones setting these standards, basically. And this ends up leading to the formation of the Comics Magazine Association of America and the Comic Code Authority, which was created by the CMAA. The Comics Code Authority was rigorously enforced. Every comic basically had code approval before they could be published. And you'll see comics of this era with the CCA logo on them, that stamp of approval, and this is very, very different. This is a far cry from what Gaines had intended when he called all these comic publishers together. He didn't want it to turn into this like fascist sort of thing that it turned into, because that's what it turned into. So he refused to join this association that he had a hand in forming. He refused to join at all. And because he refused to join, he didn't have the CCA stamp on his comics, so a lot of distributors refused to handle his comics at all, which led to Gaines having to cancel a lot of his comics, especially the horror stuff. And it eventually led to him shutting down all of his comics and focusing on one humor magazine by 1956 that he had also been publishing, which is still, I wouldn't say going strong to this day, but still exists to this day, which is Mad Magazine.
Yeah, what's insane too is that Comics Code Authority stamp like that lasted forever too.
A long time.
It may still be around for all I know, because I've been a little out of comics, but I know like in the early 2000s, was the first time like Marvel finally like created that Max imprint where they were like removing the Comics Code Authority seal, and it was like a big deal that like this major publisher was going to go adult, and remove that stuff. I don't know. Just kind of interesting that it lasted that long.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, and I think because of that, I think a lot of artists and writers sort of wanted to buck that trend of like, well, this is, a way for the government and corporations to control my art. And so out of that, long story short, you get companies like Image and Dark Horse, and they make
creator owned.
Creator owned. You're absolutely right. And they make some of the best books around.
Right.
And as is with most things, when you try to shut shit down like that, people get more interested in it.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of the kids who grew up on those comics, though, never forgot them. I mean, these were formative comic books for a lot of kids, a lot of monster kids, a lot of people who would grow up to be monster kids. A lot of those kids grew up to be writers themselves or comic book artists, or in the case of what we're talking about today, filmmakers. And Tales from the Crypt, the EC comic, was licensed for a movie in 1972, followed by, it was fairly successful, so they followed it up with A Vault of Horror in 1973. I don't know if you guys have seen those movies. Have you seen those?
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, I don't think I have either.
I don't think I have either. I'm aware. I've always been aware of Tales from the Crypt, the movie, but I don't know that I've ever actually saw it. But probably the most famous EC Comics movie wasn't actually a direct adaptation of one of their titles or any of their stories, but rather one that was heavily inspired by those comics. Of course, that's the movie we're talking about today. I'm sure you have pieced that together.
What are we talking about?
So George Romero and Stephen King both grew up reading those EC comics. They were both those kids whose like parents tried to take those comics away from them. You know, the fun thing about this whole story to me, in addition to the comic book, is the fact that you've got these two guys who now, as we think of them, are titans of horror. Now, at the time, not so much. Romero kind of was already, but Stephen King was still pretty early in his career at this time. We talked a little bit about their friendship on our Knightriders episode, but I was very curious exactly how these guys got to know each other. I knew that they were friends by the time of Knightriders, but I wasn't exactly sure why. So I looked into it a little bit, and I found out that their relationship actually predated not just Knightriders, but Dawn of the Dead as well. Their relationship, their friendship started, they were bros. These guys were friends. I mean, that's why Stephen King is in Knightriders. It wasn't because they were like writing something together. It's because George Romero and Stephen King liked each other. And he's just like, hey, you want to have this little bit part in this motorcycle drama that I'm directing? So that's why he's in there. But their relationship goes back to just after the release of Martin. So a lot like when we talked about effects, Martin actually screened at the film festival that's now known as the Sundance Film Festival. At that screening, there were some Warner Brothers executives. They liked the movie. They were impressed by Romero's work on the film. And after the film, they got in contact with Romero. They wanted to work with him. And they said, hey, we want you to meet this writer, this guy, this young writer. We just bought a book of his, one of his properties called Salem's Lot. So this, of course, is kind of typical Hollywood logic. They're like, hey, you made a movie about a vampire in a small town. Well, here's another story about a vampire in a small town. You might be into this one too.
We know you like zombies, George, but I know you want to break out of that mold. So let's put you
in this mold.
Yeah, let's put you in the vampire in small town mold. It sounds weird to me, by the way, that like Stephen King and him would hit it off. I don't think, because you got to think like now we hit it off because of horror movies or whatever, but these guys are in a time where this stuff's even harder to come by. The second one of them says EC Comics, I bet they're just like, boom.
Nerding out. Yeah. Like, this is my people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Romero and Stephen King, they meet up. Or Warner Brothers sets up a meeting with them, and they talked about Salem's Lot, but they also talked about another recent book that King was working on, or that he was publishing, called The Stand. And Romero really wanted to make The Stand, honestly, even more so than he wanted to Salem's Lot. And in the end, of course, we all know Warner Brothers ended up making Salem's Lot for television with Tobe Hooper as the director, and it's a really great adaptation. And neither King or Romero were involved by the time they made the transition to television, but the two did stay in touch. And Romero and Rubenstein, his producer that we've talked about multiple times here on the show, they went to Maine and they met with Stephen King to discuss the possibility of doing a film adaptation of The Stand. Now, I don't know that an adaptation of The Stand would have flown with any movie studio in the late 1970s because it is fucking bleak. It is very bleak, and it would be a hard sell. And it's also really, really long. So it's one that, of course, it ended up being a multi-part miniseries in the 90s, but
I read a couple of things that seemed to hint at that was part of what even appealed to Romero, was that wondering if he could like, I forget where I read that at. It was like kind of, maybe there was an idea that he wouldn't have to work, like studios were never going to be on board with this, but maybe this was something he could try to pull off on his own, like he's been doing
independently. Yeah. So during the meeting though, when Romero and King started talking about this, Romero also brought up the idea of doing a horror anthology. And his initial pitch for that was pretty interesting. He kind of had the idea to make an anthology that traced the history of horror movies, of horror filmmaking. It sounded pretty cool. Did you look into this at all, Gary?
Yeah, I read a little bit about that, just like having each one like a different era or something.
Yeah, using like different aspect ratios, different film stocks. So he would do one that's like a, black and white silent type, a Val Lewton black and white type segment. And then I think at the end, he was going to have like a big 3D segment, to kind of celebrate that era of horror filmmaking. It sounds pretty cool, honestly.
Yeah.
I wish somebody else would do that now.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome, actually.
But so he brought that up as an idea, but then Stephen King was like, no, why don't we do an anthology in the style of these EC comics that we both grew up loving? So that's kind of what they did. And Stephen King, of course, was going to write the script. He had never written a script before at this point. He hasn't written very many scripts at all, actually, Stephen King. I mean, with as many, the dozens and dozens of film adaptations of his work, he has written very few screenplays.
But it's also still Stephen King.
It's also still Stephen King. Although some of the other movies that he wrote screenplays for are less than stellar. Like,
well, I'm not trying
Silver
to pass
Bullet,
judgment on his stories or his scripts necessarily. I'm just saying, like, if you're like, hey, can you write something? He's like, I'm Stephen King. I shit stories.
Yeah, all I do is write. So, what they ended up doing, Rubenstein asked him, like, how long is it going to take you to write a script? And he said 60 days. He knew exactly how long, because Stephen King, he's talked about this a lot, but he has this routine where he approaches writing like it's a job. He sits down at a typewriter and he's like, I'm going to write for 5 hours a day. And however many words I get out, that's what I do. And sometimes he ends up throwing that day's work away because it's trash, but he's writing the whole time. And he knew exactly how long, based on how many words and how long a script needed to be, that it would take him 60 days. And 60 days later, to the day, he delivered a script, at least the first draft, to Rubenstein's desk.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's really cool like that, certain guys like that. And I know in this series, I think I've mentioned it before, Clint Eastwood, who when he directs something, his whole big thing is like on time and under budget.
Yeah, it doesn't always work out for Clint Eastwood.
Well, yeah.
But he is incredibly hit or miss as a director.
Well, sure. But it's always nice to see folks that have that work ethic of like, hey, we're going to get this done. It's going to be done right, on time, under budget, you get the product when I say it's going to come in. So,
and then there's Quentin Tarantino who's like, you'll get it when I get it.
Yeah. And it'll make you a lot of money. So just be patient. Shut up and be. Of course, some of the segments of the script were based on previously published Stephen King short stories, while others were created specifically for the film, which I think is one of the things that makes this kind of a fun anthology, because there are a couple that they were already written, although they were not widely published to the public, I guess you'd say. Prior to this, we've talked about this, like he liked to work with kind of the same crew. Even in the case of actors, he worked with a lot of the same people. He often worked with unknown or little known actors in his films. But in the case of Creepshow, he and Rubenstein and Stephen King, they kind of talked it out. They felt that the characters were so well drawn and so specific in Stephen King's script that they could cast more well-known actors, and instead of like just finding someone, they could cast someone who was more well-known but that fit the mold that King, had written. And one of the first actors that Romero met with was the legendary Tom Atkins, who actually Tom Atkins, when he read the script, he's like, I want to play the guy who gets eaten by the plants. Jordy Verrill. And Romero actually had to break it to him that he had actually already cast that role, and he had already cast Stephen King himself in that role.
Which is, on one hand, you can totally see why Tom Atkins was the most like actor heavy role, I guess. Like,
yeah, it's like a one-man show, a one-man play, basically.
Yeah, but also it's hard. Well, we'll get to it. So it's weird thinking of Tom Atkins in there at the same time.
Well, of course, Tom Atkins ended up playing the dad in the wraparound segment, which is also a great role. It's a really fun role. I mean, he's a dick, but
Tom Atkins is great in general, and
yeah,
this is his first official appearance on Cinema Shock. So
exactly, and he will appear, I'm sure, many, many more times. And of course, the young kid, the son in that segment, in the opening and closing segment, is Joe King, better known these days as Joe Hill, who is an incredible writer in his own right.
Nice.
There's plenty of people that this movie is going to have like a huge impact on, and we can talk about more later. But like it just it's weird. I was watching like some other side interview with Joe Hill, just talking about this movie and being on set, and that his dad, was kind of tied up during everything, so he just got to spend a lot of time with Tom Savini. And
That's awesome.
So he knew what his dad did, but he said it was like really like hanging out with Tom Savini that like made him just like, what I want to do when I grow up is kill people in inventive ways. And he's like, it turns out I couldn't do it with latex as well as I needed to, so I did it on the page. So
yeah, like your dad.
Yeah, like your dad. So, but it was just interesting. Like Savini apparently was like a huge influence on him.
That's fun. I didn't know that. That's
Nice.
awesome. So this was the first time that Romero and his crew got to like a real, film studio, quote unquote film studio, at least, in keeping with Romero's desire to shoot in and around Pittsburgh, as he always had. Most of the film was shot in an empty all-girls school that was just outside of Greensburg, Pennsylvania. And they basically took this school and converted the rooms and the hallways and everything into sound stages. And the prologue and the epilogue, plus the entirety of The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, at least all the interiors, and the entirety of They're Creeping Up on You, those were shot completely on the sound stages that they created in this school. In fact, there's some footage actually of this, and there's a great documentary that I got a lot of this information from, by the way, called Just Desserts, the making of Creepshow. It's an 1.5 hour long documentary about the making of Creepshow that I think Arrow Video released on Blu-ray a couple years ago. But there's some really fun behind the scenes footage where you see Tom Savini's like studio, and it's a locker room where they converted his locker room into a studio. So you walk in this locker room, because I think the gymnasium was one of the main sound stages that they used. So you walk in the locker room and there's just, latex heads and stuff everywhere. It's really cool footage. You can
That's
probably
awesome.
track it down on YouTube. I'm sure there's some excerpts on there.
Yeah.
That's cool. I guess I'll throw this in here right now. I don't know where else it will fit better, but another person during filming that I thought was really interesting that I read a story about came in as a horror fan and had planned on being a doctor, and they were just a young kid looking to check out a film set, and Romero took him on a tour around, and he said, I've never seen so many people having this much fun. It led to him meeting Tom Savini also and creating a relationship with, and Savini convincing him, not on purpose, just because of how much he loved what he did, that hey, you could be these things that you're really into, that you really dig, they can also be the things you do in life. It doesn't have to be the standard career. That man was Greg Nicotero. And,
Nice.
And so he decided against being a doctor and becoming one of the greatest special effects artists of all time. So,
Yeah, I mean, he basically became Savini's protege.
Yeah, and we'll see him pop up next week, I guess. But
yeah, for sure. We're going to approach this one a little bit differently because this film is essentially 5 short films. So I think we'll talk about each one of these segments separately. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. The first one is Father's Day. So this is one of the few segments to be filmed entirely on location. They actually filmed this one at a mansion in the Pittsburgh suburb of Fox Chapel, Pennsylvania. And the cast of this one it's really fun because George Romero sort of seems to be playing on some of these. He's playing around with the idea of, I don't know, almost casting like people he grew up watching, these like old Hollywood icons. Not people we'd see as icons now, but people that he fondly remembered from movies as a kid. This one in particular includes Vivica Lindfors. She plays Bedelia Grantham, the kind of the main, I don't know if you'd call her the main character, but she's the one that's driving the story, I guess you would say. So Lindfors, not a household name exactly, but she was a classic Hollywood actress who appeared in over 100 films throughout her career. She starred alongside the likes of Errol Flynn, Ronald Reagan, James Cagney, Charlton Heston, like all kinds of guys, like, you know, all kinds of really famous actors. And when I say starred alongside, I don't mean that she had like supporting roles in these films. I mean, she was like the romantic lead. She was
wow,
largely, I guess, forgotten by modern audiences today. But at the time, I mean, she was a big deal.
Nice.
And she's not the only classic Hollywood actress to appear in this particular segment. It also features an actress named Carrie Nye. She plays Sylvia Grantham, the I guess matriarch of the family that we see in the beginning. And Carrie Nye was another actress with a career that spanned back to the mid-1950s. She married Dick Cavett, and they were married from like the mid-60s until his death. So, you know, very much in the like Hollywood royalty realm, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, there's Ed Harris. I mean, Ed Harris now is a big deal. We talked about him a lot last week on Knightriders, and that's basically why I got the role here, because George Romero, you know, they knew each other and they were friends. And he called him because Ed Harris was not quite a movie star yet. He was definitely on the rise, but he had not yet had his breakthrough role, which came the following year in The Right Stuff when he played John Glenn. And that sort of made him, Ed Harris, the movie star that would go on to be in, you know, The Abyss and Apollo 13 and, you know, hundreds of other things that we all know him from.
But if you can't tell from here that this guy is just charismatic as all hell and just
hell of an answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of my favorite parts of this whole movie. It's just, I don't know, man, from Knightriders on, and it's like I had not seen Knightriders before, but like after this movie, like I'm just like a huge Ed Harris fan. Like I got this urge to like watch everything Ed Harris.
He's awesome, man.
He's really great.
He really is. He's got a great screen presence, even in a fairly small role here, but a fun role. I mean, he gets squished by a falling tombstone, you know, by the character that's credited in the credits as Nathan's corpse, because of course there's a different actor playing Nathan Grantham than there is playing the corpse. The corpse is played by John Amplas, who we've talked about a lot on this show, more than I thought we were going to. But right. Of course, he was the star of Martin, but he also had a small role in Dawn of the Dead and also in Knightriders. He's kind of a Romero regular, you know?
Yeah. So is Warder Shook, who's you know, he's in Dawn of the Dead. He's the security guard in the basement zombie.
Yeah.
And he's also Pippin in Knightriders.
Oh yeah. He's in this segment as well. But he, you know, I looked him up and he didn't do very much outside of the work with Romero. I don't know if he just pivoted to maybe working on stage primarily instead of movies or what, but after I saw him in this, I looked him up because I was like, oh, you know, that's Pippin. That's the same guy. But he really didn't do much after this.
That's why I wanted to make sure to give him some love here.
Well, thanks, Gary.
We appreciate you, Mr. Shook.
So Nathan's corpse, I would have to say the look of that. It is one of my favorite. It's honestly one of my favorite effects in the movie. Maybe one of my favorite of Savini's career. I just love the look of that guy. I think he's a really fun design. And there's a reason that like you see that scene of him holding the cake, you know, on t-shirts and posters and all kinds of stuff, because it's really iconic, I think, and a really, really fun design.
I mean, if you Google John Amplas, you're bound to find that photo of
that's his photo on IMDb. Right. If you look up John Amplas on IMDb, his main photo is a picture of Nathan's corpse. It's not even his face. It's a skull.
That's so awesome.
I don't know why I thought of this, but I guess it's just something in the way it moves or looks or something. But I thought of the Tar zombie from Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, like, Tarman, yeah.
Tarman, yeah, sorry. That there's just something, just a really cool looking zombie creature thing. I don't know.
Yeah, very memorable, which, you know, it's something that I think Savini does very well, is create these, I don't know, star zombies. It's something that Greg Nicotero would take into his work on The Walking Dead as well, where you've got extras, like zombie extras, and then you've got like the star zombies, and creating like a memorable look. Like in Dawn of the Dead, it happened with the one guy, the bald zombie is a very famous one, and they like that design so much that they put him on the poster to the movie, Right. But then you had, the Hare Krishna zombie, for instance, and of course we'll meet Bub next week.
Yeah.
And then what you've got here with Nathan's corpse, and that's one thing that's really interesting about this being the opening segment to this movie, is because this is somewhat familiar territory for George Romero, because this is basically a zombie story. Like, they're starting this off with a zombie story, only this time it's a zombie who, instead of wanting to eat human flesh, just wants some cake.
It's kind of interesting too, just to think about. I don't know. I feel like people get locked into roles, or at least, around the time that Dawn of the Dead remake came out. I think still to this day, people like argue about what are zombies and what aren't. What are the rules for zombies? I think it's loosening up the more and more zombie shit that comes out. But It's fun to see like a filmmaker like Romero, who basically invented it. Like, even he's toying around with that genre a little bit.
And continues for his entire career.
Right.
Because what we have to remember is that Romero, we're going to talk about his main 3 zombie movies, but he made 7 total, I think.
Oh yeah.
So but throughout his career up until his death. And one thing we have to say about Amplas being Nathan's corpse is that there is at least one shot during this where it's not Amplas in the costume, because there was a call to put like maggots on the face, and he refused to let them put maggots on his face, even though he's wearing like a mask. He's like, nah, I'm not doing that shit. No way. So they got they got like an assistant, somebody that was working with Savini or something on set. This a woman got on the costume, and she's like, I'll do it. So they weren't actually maggots. They were some other kind of like little white worm. But yeah, Amplas was like, nah, this is where I draw the line. It's like, I will crawl in a hole in the ground, but you're not putting maggots on my face.
It's important to have standards.
Yeah, hey, you gotta draw that line somewhere.
I saw they've mixed like Rice Krispie treats and maggots, or those worms.
Yeah, the worms.
Which is, breakfast was awkward.
Don't get those 2 boxes mixed up. And they did put him in a hole in the ground, by the way, the John Amplas, and what they did on that, and they actually used this effect quite a few times on this movie.
I was about to say that this had to be reused, right?
They used toilet paper as a part of the effect a lot on the movie. So what they did, they call it toilet paper. It's probably more like tissue paper, but Savini always refers to it as toilet paper. But basically, like, they had John Amplas in a hole in the ground. They dug a hole on the side of this mansion where they were filming. They were not on a set during that. They actually dug a hole and put basically like toilet tissue over it, and then covered it in dirt and grass and stuff so that he could easily put his hands up and crawl out. They left that hole there, by the way. What happened, the owner of that mansion's dog died during the filming of the movie, and he ended up burying his dog in that hole that they had dug for the movie.
Yeah, and Amplas had to shoot for 3 more days.
They just left him in there.
Yeah. Like, you stayed out here with this dog. It's fine.
I do think this is probably the most, or at least one of the most, maybe the number one, like, to me, fun segment of this whole thing. I mean, they're all fun to a degree, but there's something about this one that's just, it's filled with all those primary colors. It's those comic booky colors. It's filled with some fun gore. I feel like this one embodies those EC Comics, especially the ending is a very EC Comics kind of ending, more than just about any other segment of this entire movie.
I would totally agree. And also perfectly placed at the beginning, because it feels like it sets the right tone for what you should be expecting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So one thing that I do want to go ahead and point out here, since we mentioned, the primary colors and everything, is the cinematography by Michael Gornick. Now, Gornick is a name that's come up several times on this show, although I feel like we haven't given him enough credit yet on this series, but he started working with Romero all the way back on Martin. And he would be the DP for 5 of Romero's films, everything from Martin to Day of the Dead. Michael Gornick was the DP on all of those. And I think that Creepshow is probably the best work of his career as a cinematographer because it's just really fun. And him and Romero, they went to great pains to give the film that like comic book look, and not just in like the animated panels, which are really cool. I think those work really well, but in the colors and like the illustrations behind characters that kind of pop out, I think that stuff is really striking to look at.
I was watching this time and thinking, like, this guy had to be ahead of his time, like, with some of this. You know, we've talked about movies on our old show and stuff that kind of enact some of these same features, but I don't know. This was 1982, and George Romero. I don't feel like he gets enough credit for this kind of thing. Like, I feel as though this is something we see used over and over again through the years.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much it's been used quite like this before. And I'm talking about those backgrounds or those colors, just the way that this movie looks, especially supposed to be like a quote unquote scary movie. But even these transitions with like the animated stuff going into the real stuff and like those ideas, it just, I don't know. I just feel like there was some real talent here with thinking this up.
And those animated scenes, by the way, they were created by a group of guys, an animation studio that Romero knew, because their offices were in the upstairs part of the building where his offices were when he was with ImageWorks. So they were actually housed upstairs. So he just knew these guys. So when he was ready to create these animated sequences, he just called these guys up and had them do it. And I think those are really fun. I mean, they have a very 80s cartoon look to them, very 80s, Saturday morning look to them, which I just think is really fun.
No, I think it's a blast. And, I had read an interview where I got that story about Greg Nicotero from. He talks about just going back to this movie more than any other movie. And obviously he's got like some personal connection to it, clearly, right. But he also talks about just, I'm sure we'll mention later, but with like his later involvement with this very series that, a lot of times he finds himself like in a situation, he's like, well, how would we do this? And he could go back and say like, well, George, like he used the animation here and like, this is how he would have done it. And, just like realizing that he can just pull from the same ideas that George was doing here and like, well, stay under budget just by doing it this way. And it's just interesting.
So those scare scenes, the ones that we're talking about with, the bright designs behind somebody's head, I always thought that was probably, like a green screen or something, or back projection or something like that. I guess green screens probably weren't a big thing at the time, or if they were even a thing at all. I'd have to look up the timeline on that. I'm honestly not sure off the top of my head. But what they actually did is that they had a screen that was semi-like transparent behind them that they would back project those on, and they would just light them up. So that was actually done in real time on set, which I think is really fun. Like they would hit a switch, and all of a sudden this thing lights up behind them, which is not at all what I would ever have thought. Because now, if somebody did it now, they probably would be in front of a green screen.
Yeah.
And the same goes for like the primary colors, like when the colors switch in a scene, usually during a kill or something like that, and everything turns bright blue and red. That was just done on set with lights, where Michael Gornick just, hit a switch and all the lights switched from your traditional film lights to these bright colors, which I think is just a really great effect and really effective.
Kind of makes me happy. Sounds fun.
Yeah, isn't that fun?
It's very comic booky. That's definitely fits.
So moving on, unless you guys have anything else to say about this first segment or anything, I'm going to move on to the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill.
Well, we could analyze Ed Harris's dance scene a little bit more.
Man, I don't think there's much to analyze there. I think it's wonderful. And I love it.
It's a delightful scene.
I love his little head nod. That's the best part of it.
Right.
His little, and the wild-eyed look on his face during that moment.
his desperate attempt to still seem like he's not going bald.
Oh yeah, he's going so bald. He's only 30 years old.
So he still has not embraced it yet.
No, he never did. He still has not embraced it.
You're right.
Has, even now, he has the horseshoe around his head, you know?
That's true, yeah.
So The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill is basically a one-man show with Stephen King in the lead role. We talked about that. Romero wanted him in that role. It was actually Romero who asked him to do that. It wasn't like Stephen King's like, I want to play this role. Stephen King was pretty hesitant about it. He didn't think he was going to be up for it. He's like, I'm not an actor. I can't do this. And Romero talked him into doing it. He's like, nah, you'll be fine. Just listen to me. You'll be good. And King's acting here is very campy, very over the top.
Yeah.
But that was 100% intentional. When the film got released, that was actually a point of criticism. And Romero later said that he would maybe have King tone it down. But at the time, he was telling him to camp it up. Like he wanted it like that. He basically told him to act as if he were a Looney Tunes character. His exact direction was just act like Wile E. Coyote as he's going over a cliff. That's what he told Stephen King.
That's spot on.
Yeah, I saw a few interviews with Romero where he said that. He said, it was cool because King trusted him, but he said towards the later days of shooting, King, he could tell that King was getting frustrated. It was just like, you're making me look like an ass. Like, what are you doing?
I mean, I would never call King a good actor, not even by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think that what he's doing in this particular segment, I think he's hitting the tone perfectly. I think it fits the tone of it. We made the joke about Gary quoted it, meteor shit earlier. Nobody else could do that quite that way. I feel like I think King's inexperience as an actor actually works in his favor in this particular segment, because I think that like if you had a more well-trained actor doing goofy lines like meteor shit or like talking to yourself about how much money you're going to make off selling this meteor to the local university,
they'd still be fighting it.
Yeah, I feel like they would just not hit that campy tone quite right. I think they'd try to be too good. If that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. That's exactly what I was thinking with like Tom Savini. It's like you could see it played by like if I feel like anybody else that was a more famous actor, especially even like a Tom Savini, he would want to play it straight almost, and it wouldn't stand out. I don't think this segment would.
You mean Tom Atkins?
Or or Tom Savini.
Either one. Tom Savini would not play it down, let's just say.
I don't know about you guys, but, and Todd, I don't even think I asked you if you'd ever seen this before, but I know Justin hasn't, and I find that this segment is the one that stands out to most people. For some reason, whenever I talk to people, it's like this, for better or worse, this is the first thing. Is that the one with the guy with the plant shit,
meteor shit?
Yeah, the meteor shit growing on him.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the most memorable segments, I would say. I think Father's Day is way up there, and another one, the crate, we'll talk about in a minute. But I don't know. There's something really great about this one that is campy and silly, but it's also like if you think about it, it's a little sad. As if you took like all those campy genre elements out and like had a more serious performance, like if you think about what the story's actually about, this man being consumed and dying a slow death, it could very well be a metaphor for, cancer or some other sort of disease that's overtaking this lonely guy who's like living out in this house by himself. But and that may very well be part of the original story, because this is one that actually is based on an existing King short story, and maybe that's what King was going for in that. But adding those genre elements just makes it a lot more fun than that would be otherwise.
Well, of course, now when this comes out, I mean, I think of things like Color Out of Space and that sort of thing. Like I
rewatched that a couple nights ago, and there are definitely some major parallels, yes, between those.
Yeah, so I mean. So I guess going off what you're saying, I don't even think I'd ever even considered it like with it being a disease or anything, which is interesting because, I mean, it definitely has that unknowable, unstoppable thing, the very Lovecraftian idea that is just invading his area. And I don't know. That is kind of interesting. But yeah, maybe I'm selling Tom Atkins short, but I feel like he would have tried to machismo it up too much.
Yeah. He's a man's man. He can't. I mean, he can play goofy, but he never really plays goofy like that.
Right, exactly.
And yeah, so this is one of two segments in this film that's based on, like I said, an existing King story. The story this one's based on was called Weeds and was originally published in Cavalier magazine in 1976, but has never been collected in a King short story collection at all. The only way that it's been published at all is actually in the CREEPSHOW comic book adaptation that came out after the film, which, by the way, you get moments in this movie where you see the comic book. And do you guys know who did the art for that comic?
Well, I actually did read a little bit about that. Yeah. No, are you talking about the redo of the comic book that came out for this?
Well, both.
Well, okay. So we may be talking about two different things because I did. Well,
tell me what you know, Gary.
Well, no, I was just going to say I know that Jack Kamen, who was an original artist on the EC comics, actually did the comic that appears in the bin, the 10-cent.
Right.
CREEPSHOW comic, and he did the poster. Stephen King really wanted Graham Ingalls, who was one of the most famous artists from that period, to do the work, but he refused. That guy's an interesting story all on his own, how he kind of was betrayed by everyone. It's almost like he hated the idea that he was so good at horror comics, and then the world turned against horror comics.
Yeah.
And so
it's offense.
Yeah, so that he would refuse all of these things. But anyway, William Gaines, who we talked about earlier, actually suggested they approached Jack Kamen, who was one of their other popular artists, and he did the poster and the comic and the thing.
The poster's great. It's so good.
And I don't think that's what you're talking about, though. Sorry.
Well, no, that was part of what I was talking about, but also the book that the stories were published in later on after the movie came out. They published it in comic book form. It came out the year that the movie came out. But that was done by Bernie Wrightson, co-creator of Swamp Thing.
Nice.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, who you could even see that now that you say that.
Yeah, I'm a big Bernie Wrightson fan. I've got his Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein that he illustrated. It's not a comic book. It's actually the novel, but with these intricate, beautiful illustrations by Bernie Wrightson. I actually met him at Heroes Con one year, which the same convention Todd was just talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Really nice guy. Yeah, really nice guy. Super talented. And I feel like he's comic book royalty to me. I just love his style so much. I think it's so good.
Yeah, it's that stuff definitely has it's got a fun nostalgia, but it almost feels timeless because it's just kind of, you can't really pin it down to one particular era. It's really solid work.
Yeah.
What's funny, you see the affinity these guys have for that kind of stuff. If you go back and look at the art from these, I mean, it's seriously good stuff. That Jack Kamen and everybody we've mentioned so far, but yeah, just the idea that these guys, the name had just escaped me who I was talking about before, but it's going to drive me crazy. What was his name? It's coming.
Not that kind of coming.
Oh, there it is. No.
That's been recorded for posterity.
I just said his name. Graham Ingalls. God dang it. I knew I wanted to remember his name because I feel like that guy, I was looking up his artwork and it's so good. It's just really legitimately amazing. Yeah. And
the fun thing about EC Comics is that William Gaines let his artists, a lot of comic book companies at the time had a house style where all the artists kind of had to draw within that style. And William Gaines let his artists each do styles all their own. They drew in their own style, which is one thing that makes those comics so distinct. And so much that when they decided to later on, they decided to kind of rebrand the three horror hosts that are presented in the comic books, the Crypt Keeper, in Tales from the Crypt, the Vault Keeper, and then I can't remember what the third one's called, but there's these 3 different characters. They actually let each artist, they wanted a different artist to design each one so that each one would be drawn in the style of that artist.
That's pretty awesome.
That is pretty amazing. Yeah, you can find those covers online easily. Like I think when I was looking at this art, you can see them where they'll have like the 3 different storytellers along the side of the cover.
Yeah, yeah. So, and Tom Savini actually said that during the making of The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, he said it was the most difficult segment to work on in the film, and one of the most difficult things that he'd actually ever done, because it wasn't because of the scope of it. He'd obviously worked on much bigger projects, like, making up dozens and dozens of zombies in Dawn of the Dead. But in this one, everything they tried to do just didn't work. Like, it just wouldn't work for him. Like, he created this prosthetic tongue that you were supposed to be able to see plants grow on, like on screen, and they couldn't get it to work right. They had green contacts that they were going to put in Stephen King's eyes, and his reflexes just would not allow them to do it. They could not get the contacts in his eyes. Like, Stephen King,
he have notoriously a thing with eyes or something like that, or his eyes are real?
Well, he's got very bad eyesight.
Maybe
the giant glasses that he wears all the time. And so in this segment, when you see him like doing that thing with his eyes all the time, like really wide, that's not just him like acting. That's him not like being fucking blind. He just can't see. Like, so he just keeps doing that like as a reflex.
I read he also loved to fuck with people with that fake tongue. Like he would just like shoot it out at people.
He liked to fuck people with a fake tongue.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said.
Don't knock
what I said. It's not the way I meant to say it, but I mean it.
Don't knock it until you try it.
So the only effect that kind of worked without a hitch in this segment was when Jordy shoots his own face off with a shotgun. But in that case, it wasn't Stephen King. It was actually Savini's assistant. And the way they did that is they had this setup where the assistant would lay down on his back through a wall. There was like a hole in the wall. He laid down on his back. So the legs, Jordy's legs, are the assistant's legs wearing this outfit. But the upper torso that you see, which is all covered in plant, is all fake. So the kid who is playing Jordy in that scene, he's holding the shotgun up at Jordy's face, but he can't see where the face is. So they're actually having to direct him on where to point the shotgun. Like, no, the face is to your left, just try to get him to point it in the right direction. And then they blew up the head. I don't know if they shot it, but they exploded it, By the way, that assistant was, and I called him a kid because he was 17 years old. He was a 17-year-old kid that worked as Savini's assistant on this. It was a guy named Daryl Ferrucci. And the majority of the effects in the film, according to Tom Savini, they didn't have like a big crew. This is actually, for as popular as this movie is, pretty low budget. I mean, I think it ended up being about $6 to $8 million all in, which for a movie of this scope is still pretty low. But Savini didn't have like a crew of makeup artists, of effects artists. It was him and this 17-year-old kid who did most of the effects in this movie, which is pretty impressive. Yeah. Ferrucci had actually been Savini's assistant on The Burning and on The Prowler as well. So they had worked together. And he didn't really have a long career as an effects guy, although other than these, he worked actually on Chud, but not as an effects guy. He worked like in the electrical department on Chud.
Well, probably because Savini just like drove him nuts. Like it's weird. I don't know. You can get away with a 17-year-old kid like dragging him around on all these trips. But I saw like right after this movie, some VFX guy, and I can't remember the interview if Tom Savini said who it was, but like was like, hey, I got these guys from Hong Kong that are looking to make a movie and they need an effects or like makeup department, and so he brought Ferrucci with him. And they just grabbed a bunch of shit from CREEPSHOW and took it and showed it to them. They ended up hiring them and not hiring the VFX guy who got them the interview. And so Ferrucci and Savini went to Hong Kong same year and like worked on it. It was called like Zhao Xing Papa. It's Till Death Do We Scare is the name of the movie. And I've never seen this, but
I've never heard of it.
It's just the two of them doing effects on this like Chinese horror movie.
That's awesome.
Very interesting. So I'm going to go on another little side tangent here because I think that after talking about the Jordy Verrill segment, I think that's a good time to start talking about the production design on this film, because I think this is one of the segments where it's especially good. The film's production designer was a guy named Cletus Anderson. I love the name Cletus. I really do.
Who doesn't?
It's just a great name. There aren't enough Cletuses in the world, honestly.
There's probably a reason for that.
Well, it's really hard to find because it's under that one flap of skin.
Oh,
you have to get it.
It's hard to find Cletus.
You gotta just get it just right.
What's funny is that you're saying this. Cletus Anderson was right there, the production designer, and I've heard he doesn't exist.
Oh man! So I think that Cletus Anderson's work on this film is really good. Personally, I think he's doing pretty stellar work on this, especially again for such a low budget movie. I think every location that you see gives you all the information you need to know about it. Like whether it's Jordy's shack of a house or Leslie Nielsen's fancy house or E.G. Marshall's high tech apartment at the end of the movie. I think they're all recognizable and just slightly over the top, like just over the top enough to give you that comic book feel. But like you see Leslie Nielsen's apartment, you know everything you need to know about that dude, right?
Yeah,
like in one shot. It's really great. But so in this segment, in the Jordy Verrill segment, they had to build basically everything from scratch. Like we mentioned, all the interiors were filmed at that closed girls' school, but since there's like a progression of how the plants grow in the story, they actually had to film this in continuity, which is not the way you would normally film anything. So they had to basically film part of the scene, add plants, and go on as the story went on. Then the outside of the shack, the barn, everything was all built by production. They didn't find like an old barn. They built that on the hill. They just found this open field basically. And Tom Savini, in that Just Desserts documentary, tells a really fun story about this barn. So apparently this hill that they built the barn on was a visual cue for like pilots going through the area. So they knew that this hill was there and they knew where they were based on this hill being there, right? And all of a sudden one day they're flying over and there's a fucking barn there that's never been there before, and it's a barn. It's weathered because the production designer made it look weathered. So there's a barn there that looks like it's been there for 80 years, and they're like, "What? What the fuck? Where am I?"
I'm so confused. They're like, "What's happening right now?"
I'm so confused. And then one day, all of a sudden, so once filming's done, they tear the barn down. So all of a sudden, these pilots are going over, and the barn, there's no evidence. It's gone. Hill again.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, that's awesome.
They were responsible for so many missing people that year.
It's like the Bermuda Triangle of Pennsylvania. All right, so the next segment is Something to Tide You Over. The cast of this one, of course, includes Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson, and in a small, almost unrecognizable part is Dawn of the Dead's Galen Ross.
I'd never recognized her before this time around.
I didn't either, honestly, until this time. Leslie Nielsen apparently was quite the prankster on set. He had an electronic fart machine that he would carry around with him.
Nice.
They'd go out to like dinner after, and he'd hold it under the table while the servers there taking their order, and just be every now and then.
That doesn't sound like him.
Ted Danson, George Romero tells a story where at the premiere of Dawn of the Dead, Ted Danson, this is before Ted Danson was very well known. They were at the premiere and George, they're kind of talking. George was like, "Yeah, what are you doing next?" And he's like, "Yeah, I don't know. I just signed on to this TV show. It's about a bunch of people who just like kind of hang out at a bar. I don't really know if it's going to go anywhere." Of course.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And apparently I read this in an article in a couple different places when I was researching this, but apparently Richard Gere appears in this scene as a man on the television in a small uncredited role. And I found this in a couple places when I was researching it, but I couldn't find any like real confirmation of it. And when you look at his IMDb, Richard Gere, by 1982, he had already appeared in Days of Heaven, the Terrence Malick movie, and in Paul Schrader's American Gigolo, which he starred in. I mean, he starred in Days of Heaven as well, but American Gigolo was like a star-making role for Richard Gere. So the idea of him doing a small, uncredited role in this is kind of weird, unless this just happened to be filmed before those. Maybe, I'm not sure.
I was going to say, is it archive footage? I mean, was it something for me?
I'd have to go back and watch and look for him, because I found this out after I watched it.
When I saw your notes, but yeah, I never got a chance to.
Yeah, so I'm really not sure. Maybe that's just one of those urban legends or something, where somebody thinks that it's Richard Gere and it's just a guy who kind of looks like Richard Gere. That happens a lot on these when you see these little bits of trivia on movies like this.
Right.
Yeah.
So Something to Tide You Over is filmed. It was filmed on sets for all the interior scenes, but the exteriors were shot on location at a beach in New Jersey. It was sort of in the middle of nowhere. They specifically wanted one that looked like it was in the middle of nowhere, so that it's conceivable that when Ted Danson is buried and screaming that no one would hear him, the only house you see is Leslie Nielsen's house, which was not really there. It was a matte painting. Because they actually did film it on a deserted beach where there was literally no houses, so they had to put one in with a matte painting.
To be honest, I didn't even realize that was a matte painting.
I didn't either until
Neither did Leslie Nielsen until he had to go take a shit. You can imagine how frustrating that is.
So to shoot the scenes where Ted Danson is buried, they basically they built a hole in the ground on the beach for him to sit with a chair in it. They put a chair in it so he could sit down. And then they put kind of this thing around his neck and then put sand on it, like he was buried. And then they shot it on the actual beach, but not in the actual tide, because they didn't want to drown Ted Danson.
Sorry.
Right.
So they ended up Cletus Anderson built this sort of wave machine to simulate the surf. So it was like this series of kind of boxes that would pour water down in a way where it looked like a natural surf coming up to meet Ted Danson's face. And then when they had to do something else for the scene, you get a brief shot of Ted Danson like underwater, Yeah. And for that, they filmed it in studio, but they filmed him in a very kind of similar setup, except that his head, instead of being above the sand, was in like an aquarium type deal. Yeah. And they had to put like an oxygen tank, like a scuba diver would use, and he had to breathe through that. And then when they were ready to call action, take it away, and then he would act, and then they'd give him the air back again.
Ugh.
Yeah, and Tom Savini, when he tells the story about that, he's like, we had, safety procedures in play in case something went wrong, but I always stood to the side of the set with us. He's like, I had a sledgehammer in my hand the whole time. He's like, if all these other safety measures fail, I'm ready to smash that thing and get him out of there.
Yeah.
So there's Tom Savini, not only a great special effects guy, not only a great actor and stuntman, but safety supervisor.
Yeah, there you go.
We've officially proved like Tom Savini is the legend of Hollywood.
He is. He's a man of all trades. He's a Renaissance man.
He's like he should be on a Mount Rushmore of Hollywood.
Yeah, I agree.
He's earned his spot.
So I got to say, as long as we're talking about this segment, I love Leslie Nielsen in this. I love Ted Danson too. I think they're both great, but this is actually my personal least favorite of the bunch.
I'm certainly surprised to hear you say that. I thought we were going to have an argument about it, but actually this is my least favorite. I think this is the movie's weak point.
This has always been my least favorite. Always has. And I know our buddy Craig Carson, friend of the show, I know that this is his, we've talked about it with him, that this is his personal favorite segment. But this is,
I saw people say that. And the thing that I can give it is that I do think Leslie Nielsen is legitimately like kind of creepy sometimes. Like he does.
I think the performances are great. And when Leslie, and I love the gore effects, or the makeup effects, I should say, of the corpses. I think they're really great, kind of a waterlogged version of a zombie, I think they're really fun. And I think that like Leslie Nielsen, when he's screaming in terror at the end, is really good. And I honestly think the overall concept of this segment is really, really good. And really, really fun.
So are you going to, on record right now, admit that probably the issue with this whole segment is Stephen King's writing?
I think it is, yeah. I think that there's... listen, as big of a Stephen King fan as I am, and I am a major Stephen King fan, you guys know this, he also wrote Dreamcatcher. So the guy's not infallible. Come on.
That's true. That's true.
I think the problem with this one is that it's too sluggish. I think there's too much talking. There's too much exposition. There's too much telling instead of showing. I think that this one could have worked better had it been earlier in the film, maybe. But after the fun 1-2 segments of Father's Day and Jordy Verrill, those like fun, over-the-top, campy, comic booky segments, I think this one's just a little too slow to be at the midpoint of the movie.
I think that was it for me too. Is it's like if you're watching the other ones, even if you weren't feeling them, especially after Jordy, like if you were just like, "What the fuck was that? That was goofy as shit."
Yeah.
At least they all felt like it's like you said, a 1-2 punch. It's like punchy stuff just happening.
Right.
It's done. All right, on to the next one, and then it's like you get here, and it's like everything grinds to a halt.
Right. And again, it's a fun concept. I just think it just doesn't quite work at the point that it's at in the film. And it's just, and the ironic part here is that on multiple episodes of this podcast, I've talked about how good of an editor I think George Romero is. And this is the slowest paced segment of the film to me, and it's the one that Romero edited. But I don't think that it's slow due to his editing, actually. I think it's still a pretty well edited segment. I just think that I think the script is just, I think it's just a little too talky, not that it's poorly edited. I just think in the case of this one, I think it's weaknesses. I think the weakness is the writing.
Yeah, it just feels heavy, and yet I pin it down to dialogue, like just too, like you said, exposition and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I feel because I actually like this segment.
I don't think it's terrible or anything, but just in comparison to the others, I should clarify that this is my favorite.
I feel like this could have been maybe a feature. Like this is something where it's that talky and drawn out. I feel like this maybe got pared down, because I mean it starts right off with if this was a feature, this starts where probably a third of the way through the movie.
Well, I mean, I could see that if it were more of a fleshed out, like overall story where you got like background on the couple and on the relationship.
Yeah, and
But I think as a short, I think it's actually too long. I think as a short, it could be 5 minutes shorter and cut out a bunch of the exposition, it would flow better.
Well, see, that's the thing is like when he's when he's got the screen in front of him and she's on the screen somewhere else, also drowning. I don't feel like I really care so much, just because this thing has moved along so quickly. Like,
well, you never get to meet her.
Yeah, you never get to meet her, and you never get to feel any sort of ties to these characters or anything like that. And I feel like that's where maybe this should have been a feature or a short on its own, like a 40-minute short. And but I still like it.
Going for like caring for somebody, like maybe you make it a whole feature where you actually give background on all of these characters. It would be a totally different kind of movie, but
it would. Yeah, it would.
But yeah, in this kind of movie where it's just been like these, pretty fast-paced stories so far.
Yeah, it kind of grinds to a halt here.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I like it, I mean, I dig the performances. The performances are really great, but I think for me as a person who's also afraid of drowning, I think that's probably part of the reason.
There is a part of it. Hey, no,
and being buried alive.
Yeah, there's a part of it where I think about being in that scenario where you literally can't. It's the same thing I imagine for people with bugs. Like bugs never bother me, which we're going to get to. Like they never bother me that much in movies, but I can see it. Like, especially if like bugs really, really just F you up. Like there's a feeling about, if you can portray it just right, about like you can't move and you're just going to slowly be covered up. Like it just that does suck. There's nothing fun about that.
No, yes, it would suck. Yeah. So Romero edited this segment of the film, but the film had a total of 4 editors working on it. Father's Day and They're Creeping Up on You were edited by the same guy, a guy named Michael Spolin. The Lonely Death of Jordy Verrill was edited by Pasquale Buba, who we've talked about on the show. He's the guy who worked on effects and Knightriders with Romero.
I was going to say, I think I mentioned. Sorry, I was just going to say. I think I mentioned. I feel like I mentioned him in Knightriders, and like that was the first time George started letting him in, and then he would forever, or what, he was the guy that was like really cool with Al Pacino. Also later, like he was like Romero and Al Pacino. He became like their editor, like the guy that they trusted, because he goes on with Romero to like Monkey Shies, Two Evil Eyes, The Dark Half, all of that, until he makes friends with Al Pacino and starts doing Heat and Solomon, stuff like that. Like he's just doing all this stuff. He just becomes a really good editor.
Yeah. I mean, he made a career out of it. So the Crate segment was edited by a guy named Paul Hirsch. And I looked into Paul Hirsch, and this dude has a hell of a resume. He worked on a lot of Brian De Palma movies, going all the way back to Hi, Mom, but he worked on another King adaptation, Carrie, which the first King adaptation, actually. But Sisters, Phantom of the Paradise, plus some later De Palma movies like The Fury, which actually gets referenced in Effects, I believe. Blowout, Raising Cain, Mission Impossible. Like he worked with De Palma all the way. Yeah, all the way up into the 90s, even the 2000s. By the way, I just watched Raising Cain like a week or two ago. That movie's pretty fun. Really fun John Lithgow performance if you haven't seen it. He plays multiple personality. That's not a spoiler. It's in the very first scene of the movie. But like I'm watching that movie and I'm going, I think James McAvoy watched this before he did Split, because he is doing the exact same thing.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, you also have to think that it sounds like this guy is responsible for the barn scene with Kevin Bacon dancing, in Footloose. So he worked on Footloose. He also worked on a couple of movies in the late 70s, early 80s called Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, I don't know this.
He did Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He did Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. He did Still Magnolias. Like the dude, he's still working now. Like he's still working to this day. And that's just a small sampling of his filmography. If you look this guy up on IMDb, his last movie, his most recent credit was that Tom Cruise Mummy movie that came out in 2017, which proves that not everything he touches is gold.
Also he proving like a 1-2 punch there himself with Warcraft and then the Mummy.
Oh, he also did Date Movie and The Adventures of Pluto Nash. So the guy has done some garbage, but that's not on him.
He's listening right now, screaming, "I didn't write the shit.
I didn't write Pluto Nash, you sons of bitches.
You should have seen it before I chopped it up."
Like I moved it from an F to a D-. Well, we're moving on from my least favorite segment to probably my favorite segment of the whole movie, which is the Crate. So ironically, I think this next segment, even though it's my favorite, feels the least like an EC Comics story and more just like kind of a straightforward creature feature. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah,
I would say so.
It doesn't have that it kind of has a twist ending, a shock ending, but not quite in the same way as something like Father's Day did, or even something that tied you over with like all of a sudden we've got zombies to deal with. It turns into a completely different type of story.
Or even though it's like trying to, or even as if it's trying to give you a some kind of moral ending or whatever. It's just like it's a monster movie.
Yeah, it's a monster movie. So, and this is the other segment in the film that is based on a pre-existing King story. Just like Weeds, this one has never been published in. It's never been collected. It's only been previously published in a magazine, which was a 1979 issue of Gallery. And much like Father's Day, it also features some Hollywood royalty in some of the roles. So the main one, of course, being Hal Holbrook. Hal Holbrook is a Hollywood legend, having appeared in films like Magnum Force and All the President's Men. But probably his most famous role was the one-man play called Mark Twain Tonight. You guys have probably seen footage or images of Hal Holbrook as Mark Twain. He started playing that role in the mid-1950s. He would play it for 60 consecutive years. He finally retired it completely in, I think, like 2017, like literally 3 years ago. And I mentioned that mostly because Mark Twain Tonight was actually a favorite of Tom Savini's. It's something that Tom Savini talks about in Smoke and Mirrors, a really great Tom Savini documentary that's on Shudder. I would highly recommend if you're interested in really taking a deep dive into his career. But Savini really was interested in Mark Twain tonight, not because he was like this big Hal Holbrook fan or Mark Twain fan, but because one of his heroes, makeup legend Dick Smith, the guy who's responsible for the makeup effects in The Exorcist, he was responsible for transforming Hal Holbrook into Mark Twain.
Nice.
And just 2 years prior to Creepshow, Holbrook had appeared in John Carpenter's The Fog. So he had done horror before as well. He plays the priest, whose name I can't remember, but the priest in The Fog is Hal Holbrook. And of course, he starred in that alongside Adrienne Barbeau, who would play his wife here. Barbeau, of course, was a longtime collaborator of John Carpenter. They were married for a while. Even though she was never a fan of horror movies, and she talks about that in interviews. She's like, I don't like horror movies, even though she starred in quite a few of them. But she knew Romero because him and Carpenter were friends, but she was pretty much unfamiliar with his work, being not a fan of horror movies. So when she was offered this part, John Carpenter actually talked her into doing this. She's like, you got to do it. George is awesome. George makes awesome movies. You got to do this role.
Yeah, it's weird. This one is supposed to be the one that's like designed to tickle my fancy because it's, you know, she's married to John Carpenter at this time when this movie happens, and then Carpenter ends up doing Christine, and like right after this, I think, and then Holbrook is in this. Tom Atkins is in this. Like it's like you got like a big crossover of like their people. I don't know. Like it kind of feels that way. Also, this movie has the thing with the box that's
the crate, the name of the name of the segment.
Yeah,
the crate.
Well, the crate. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know why I would call it the box. Different movie. But it's what's it say on it? It says like shipped to Julie Carpenter or something like that. Oh, does it? Yeah, on the crate. That's fun. Yeah, it says from Arctic Expedition or whatever. So it is
thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and this one really does let Savini run wild. This one is really fun. So the creature in this one, who got nicknamed Fluffy by the crew, is, I think, just a ton of fun. I love the design of this creature. It's ridiculous. It's kind of goofy looking, but also kind of terrifying at the same time. Like it's sort of is it a Yeti or is it a baboon or is it just something else completely different? It's such a bizarre design, and I really, really love it. I think it's one of the best effects of Savini's career, personally.
It's oh God,
Todd wasn't feeling this one.
Oh no,
it's here's the thing. I look at it like this segment could have. I love all the nods to Carpenter and all that, and it's really a lot of fun. I kind of wish they played it a little more like Jaws and show us the creature a little less.
That's not the kind of movie this is trying to be, though. This is like Jaws is trying to create like some real tension. These DC comic stories are not really about creating that kind of tension. They're about giving you the creature. They're about giving you a monster and showing you the monster. Yeah. I mean, I subscribe to that theory on a lot of horror movies, that less is more, but it depends on what you're going for. I don't think the crate is going for that. I think the crate wants you to see the monster because you're really honestly rooting for the monster at the end when he feeds Adrienne Barbeau to that thing, because she is fucking terrible. Not as an actress. Adrienne Barbeau is a delight. I love her, but her character is a nightmare.
Oh yeah, her character is absolutely the worst.
She is a nightmare. But I think Fluffy I think it's a really fun design. It's totally unlike anything that Savini had ever done before. This is actually the very first articulated creature that Savini had ever created. And so in the story that this is based on, Fluffy, or it's not called Fluffy, obviously, but the creature is described as a flash of teeth and fur. And that's as much description as King gives it. So it kind of left the design open to interpretation. So Savini and a couple other designers worked up some sketches for how they interpreted that. And they handed them off to Romero, who ultimately chose Savini's design. So that's what they're going with. So Savini's like, all right, now I got to make this thing. And I've never done this before. I do like squibs and gore effects and chop the tops of heads off, but I've never created an entire creature from scratch that is clearly not human. So he called Rob Bottin, hot off of not the success of the thing, not the commercial success of the thing, but the creative success of the thing. Rob Bottin, who is another one of the legends of creature effects, and he calls him up. He's like, "Dude, I need help. I don't know how to do this." And I'm signed. Like, George wanted me to do this role because I've done all the effects for all of his movies. So like, he wanted me back, and I don't know. I can't tell George that I don't know how to do this. So Rob Bottin talks to him on the phone for like an hour and a half and gives him in like great detail exactly what Savini would need to do. And Savini, based off of that phone conversation, was able to create this creature. And it's basically a puppet. I mean, he sculpted the head, but the head went over like a performer's face. It was actually that same 17-year-old assistant played Fluffy as well. So I hope he was getting paid well in this movie. He had to play Jordy Verrill and Fluffy.
Just for all of the shit roles. And by the way, I know Barbo, like, she seems like a delight, but I guarantee you Deborah Hill stood up and cheered during this scene.
But Gary, what do you think? Okay, we know Todd did not like The Crate. Todd apparently doesn't like this one, even though this, I said it's my favorite, but I feel like this is one of the, if not the favorite of most fans of this film.
Yeah, I think what's weird how many people I've seen really get down with the Something to Tide You Over story, because I have seen that one listed multiple times, but I would say that's probably my least favorite. And I've bounced back and forth between The Crate and between what was it, Father's Day. Yeah, I bounced between the two of those being my favorites. They're for different reasons. Like The Crate, I feel like it tickles all of my senses for things I like in fun horror movies and stuff like that. And it's also obviously got the tribute to John in there, or at least not a tribute to John, but it's playing
some homages, some references. Yeah. And,
but then Father's Day, I just feel like is as wacky as this whole movie is supposed to be. So it's just, I don't know. It's one of those is probably my
those
favorite.
Are my top two as well. Well, let's go ahead and rank them. Rank the segments. Favorite to least favorite.
So if I had to do it, I would probably gun to head. Honestly, I would go Father's Day, The Crate. I would go I think I would probably I would go with They're Creeping Up on You, and then Jordy, and then Tide You Over.
How about you, Todd?
Tide You Over, Creeping Up on You.
Tide You Over is number one for you.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Tide You Over, Creeping Up on You.
I told you guys we were going to do this. You didn't do your homework.
No, I know. God, it's tough. I don't know. I think Jordy Verrill might be last for me.
Oh, boo, Todd.
I know.
Everybody boo Todd.
Boo this man!
Boo. Boo.
Well, I mean, he was next to last for me, so I can't.
Yeah. It's kind of a toss up. Yeah, it's kind of a toss up with the last three.
Mine's pretty close to yours, Gary. I would go The Crate, Father's Day, They're Creeping Up on You, Jordy Verrill, and then Tide You Over.
Okay.
And Jordy Verrill being next to last is no dig on that one because I like it. I honestly like them all. The only one that I don't love is Tide You Over, and that's just because it's a little slow. But there's a lot that I love about that one. I love, we talked about Leslie Nielsen, and I love the concept, and I love the creature design, and there's a lot to love about that one. So it's even
there's nothing in here I hate.
Yeah, they're all fun. They're all super fun. So, well, I guess let's talk about Creeping Up on You because that's the final segment of the film, and the final segment almost didn't get made. By the time because they were filming this one last, and by the time they got to this one, they'd already gone over budget. So they're like, well, I don't know, maybe we just need to we've got 4 really good ones already. Let's just stick with those 4. But Cletus Anderson, actually, the production designer, helped convince Romero to go ahead with it. He's like, it's a single set, basically, and the set is the biggest expense of the story. He's like, I can do that really cheap. And there's only one actor, basically, in this. I mean, there's a second actor, but there's essentially only one actor for the majority of the runtime. So they went ahead and went for it. And they had to build this set in that girls' school. And I'm really glad that they decided to make this one, because I think out of all the segments in this film, I think this is the one that feels the most Romero-esque, in that this is the one that has that social commentary, the social message that he was known for.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a story about a businessman, a cruel, despicable human being who has gotten like filthy rich by exploiting poor people. You know, he slings racial slurs at this building manager while sitting in this blindingly white apartment, you know, until he's completely consumed by what is basically the metaphor, the way that I see it, is that he's being consumed by kind of the manifestation of his own hatred, his own nastiness, and his distrust of anyone that he sees as beneath him, as a pest, as a vermin.
Yeah. Now, initially, I saw that it was going to take place in like this lush, like carpeted pit house kind of thing, you know, to obviously give him that rich vibe. But I think it actually works out better that they keep it this like clean, pristine, like
super sterile.
Yeah, exactly. Like kind of situation. Another side note, I saw that they had The Hitchhiker as another Stephen King story on the back burner in case this one started to go over budget or something. So they were ready to switch.
Oh yeah,
to The Hitchhiker, which shows up in, I think, part 2 is actually one of the segments in there. But anyway, just a side note. But no, this one's a lot of fun and
so many roaches.
Real icky. Yeah.
Holy crap. There were so many roaches.
So they decided to make this one, and they're like, all right, we need a shitload of roaches. Like literally, they're like, we need like 250,000 roaches. We need 250,000 roaches. So they hired these 2 entomologists, and they sent them to Trinidad. Or the guys were like, we need to go to Trinidad. That's where there's just a lot of roaches, and we can get a lot of them there. So they go to Trinidad, and they go in these bat caves, because apparently roaches love bat shit. They're attracted to guano. And they would dig these holes in the bat cave, and the holes would just fill up with roaches. So they would like stick their hands in and like gather all the roaches, and then it would just happen again. Roaches would just fill up like it's a fucking well full of water, but it's roaches. So they just keep doing it. And they said that the cave was so filled with roaches, there were so many roaches in that cave, that they could literally lie down on their back and the roaches would move them across the floor. So they brought 18,000 roaches, approximately. I don't think anyone counted them, but they said they brought about 18,000 back to the States and then bred them to get the amount that they needed. The roaches actually got their own trailer on the set. They called it the Roach Motel, but there was basically a trailer on set that just housed roaches.
Yeah, I think they had to keep like a climate controlled environment for them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's weird.
They would also like put Vaseline around the edges of the set they built, like at the tops of the walls, because the entomologists were like, just put Vaseline there and they won't be able to get over. So they did that, and they set down the roaches, and then the roaches crawled up the wall and just went right over the Vaseline. But they had to like try to gather all after they were done shooting. They would try to gather as many of the roaches back as they could. And roaches you can't train them. You can't like direct them. So they would basically just have to dump them out and then film them as quickly as they could. But like within 5 seconds of the camera rolling, the roaches were gone because they were running off to the corner somewhere.
There was some segment of a film festival where Romero talks about a little bit that these guys, or the roaches, were the most expensive part, because they ended up costing like, I forget how many cents per roach he said, but
it's like 50 cents a roach or something.
Yeah, I wanted to say 50. I couldn't tell if that felt high, but and then for anybody wondering, no, the roaches did not survive the shoot. Like like the health department was on them. They had to, which is weird. It's not what you'd expect to hear, but that they had to kill them by the end of it.
Roaches are the worst. I was going to say, like, spiders, I can, we did a arachnophobia episode a while back on our other show, and I'm like, you know what? Some spiders are fine. I've got an orb weaver living by my front door right now. I don't give a shit. Roaches have no benefit. They're just the worst, disgusting creatures. I got to tell you guys a story.
Yeah.
I watched this movie on Wednesday. Today's Monday. I watched it last Wednesday. Saturday, 2 days ago, me and Bunny, my wife, we were doing some deep cleaning in the house. And we've had a couple roaches show up in the last couple months, and we've had some, pest control come out. We have a lot of trees right beside our back door, so bugs get in and it happens, whatever. So we've had pest control. They, we get regular, quarterly sprayings and everything, but we still occasionally will see like a roach, and I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like, are these pest control guys not doing their job? So this is disgusting.
The big guys,
fucking huge, man.
Yeah,
they're so big.
Those are the ones I swear they come from trees and stuff too. Like,
and I think they're coming from the trees in my backyard. But we've got this. Bunny was like deep cleaning, like spring cleaning kind of shit, and she was taking all the drawers out of our dresser in our bedroom, and behind those drawers was fucking dozens of roaches.
Wow.
And, like in the cracks of the dresser, like in the little crevices, just piles of them. And we keep a pretty clean house.
Yeah.
And Bunny is traumatized by it still 2 days later, still like literally she started like scrubbing out the dresser, and I'm like, Bunny, just fuck that dresser. Just throw it outside.
Set it on fire.
Yeah.
And we did. I put it by the road.
We got a new fire pit.
I put it by the road, and the trash picked it up today. I'm like, fuck that dresser, because we can clean it all we want, but roaches can get anywhere. They can get anywhere.
That's the problem.
They'll get in every little crack. So I'm like, we could clean it all we want. They could still be in there, and we don't know how they got. I mean, I'm assuming they came in from the trees outside, but it was like. And the thing is, like, just like in this story, the roaches don't really care how clean you keep your house.
Yeah.
Because they will find a way to get in. They're the worst fucking creatures. They talked about on the set of this that they would, the roaches would scatter and you wouldn't see them anywhere, but then they would like take the phone apart,
Oh my God.
Romero's like, we take a phone apart that's in there, and the inside of the phone is just a phone-shaped mass of roaches that have just squeezed themselves into the inside of this phone, because they brought 250,000 roaches to set. What the fuck do you think's going to happen?
Yeah, no, that's it. The health department, like, supposedly, I mean, well, I grew up in the country, man. I saw.
Dude, I grew up in Louisiana. The roaches there were 3 inches long.
Yeah, and what I saw were a bunch of the little ones, and the little ones are just as terrible because they'll hide everywhere too, and everything. But I do remember one day, just not to make this the roach podcast, but we could. But I had to help my friend and his dad pulled out a tree in their backyard one time. And the reason I thought of the big ones is like he sawed it, and it was fine. Everything was going great. We had a chain, and like he pulled the tree, and like as it tipped over and fell, I swear to God, like thousands of roaches like came out of that tree. It was
like on the inside of the tree?
Yeah, on the inside of the tree. And they all just like ran out. It was just like this wave of roaches.
Oh, God damn it. It's like,
oh my God.
Like Joe's apartment.
Yeah. Exactly. And then for like weeks afterwards, we'd be like hanging out in his living room, and like there'd be a random giant roach.
Yeah. Like they just never go away. Like that day that happened, I ran down to the hardware store and I got some Raid. And I'm just in there like, I got to close the door so the dogs can't get in. And I'm just like, every time I see one, psst, psst. It's like the guy in this movie. I was that fucking guy. And this was like 2 days after I'd seen it. And like, that was the worst time to see this, because I'm like, I saw what happened to that guy. Because they were buried inside of his body.
By the way, there's any other way to end this episode except for you bursting into a bunch of roaches.
That scene, I love that effect in this, by the way. Savini was never in the room with the roaches. I don't know if that was like he says, he's like, I wasn't in the room. I was watching it through a window and directing from there.
Yeah. He said he would not go in there.
He wouldn't do it. But they basically created E.G. Marshall as the actor in this. He's another old school Hollywood actor, great character actor. And he's so good in this. Like, he plays such a despicable dude. When they cast him in this, they're like, hey man, you're gonna be in this segment where there's gonna be like tens of thousands of roaches crawling all around you. He's like, yeah, man, that's cool. Like, whatever. He's like, he's such a like seasoned actor. He's like up for anything, whatever.
Yeah, poor Tom Savini, who will like set himself on fire and drive himself into a wall on a motorcycle.
But don't put me near those roaches.
I will not touch a roach.
I don't blame them. They're gross. But yeah, so they built this, fake E.G. Marshall body and filled it with roaches, but they couldn't get the roaches to come. Like, they didn't know how to get them to come out. So they had the idea, and I want to say it was like Romero's idea. Like, Savini couldn't figure out how to do it, but they once again used toilet paper. So they created like a hole in the chest and covered it in toilet paper, super thin, and then painted it to look like skin. And then the roaches burst out of it because it was so thin. So that's how they ended up doing that. And nice. One of the guys who was instrumental to shooting this scene was John Harrison. John Harrison, we've talked about on the show before. If you listen to Effects or Knightriders, then you already know that name. He was, he had a small role in Knightriders, but he also did some music for it. And he was, of course, one of the lead actors in Effects. But he was the first assistant director on this movie. But in addition to being the first AD, he was also the composer for Creepshow. And Romero had originally wanted to score it with library music from the 50s, as he's done on some past films. And they did a temp score with this library music, but then they were a lot of it wasn't like great high fidelity, and they wanted to kind of try to take it and then improve upon it. So John Harrison and Romero were like, okay, we're going to create little bits of music to kind of link these together. And they started doing that. Then they just kept adding more and more until basically they had just scored the whole film. So it kind of worked out by accident. But
yeah.
So one little thing, one effect, I guess we should say that Savini did on this movie that we haven't really talked about is the creep. That's the ghoul, the like skeleton guy at the beginning of the movie. And I love him. I think he's great. I think he's a great looking creature. And I was blown away when I found out how they made him.
Tom Savini legitimately murdered a man.
He didn't murder a man, but he sure did use a real human, because that is a real skeleton. They used a real skeleton in this.
That's awesome.
Basically, it's like a Hungarian skeleton or something that they got a hold of somehow. And they turned it into like a puppet, like a life-size puppet. It took 8 dudes to control it. And yeah, that's the ghoul. They added eyes and stuff to it, obviously, and articulated it, but they articulated real bone. It was cheaper than building it from scratch.
That's crazy still. Yeah. I mean, to think about like somebody out there is related to the
creep. Yes. That was somebody's grandpa. All right. So they finish the film and they release it. But first they take it to the Cannes Film Festival. And there they invited an executive for Warner Brothers, but he wasn't able to get in because the screening was packed. It was at the Cannes Film Festival, but it was at one of these like small theaters, like kind of off to the side, but still technically part of the festival. But still, people were there to see it. It went really well and was packed, and the executive could not get in. So they had to do a private screening for him. And then Warner Brothers immediately signed on to distribute the film after that.
Nice.
And the film was released on November 10th, 1982, and came in at number 1 at the box office. First time that's ever happened for a Romero movie. And only time, actually.
I was about to say, maybe the last time.
Yeah, it may have happened with Land of the Dead later on. I'd have to look into that, but definitely the first time and one of the only times. It actually knocked First Blood out of the number 1 spot.
Beat old Rambo.
What?
I said it beat old Rambo. Todd made Rambo sounds.
Oh, is that what that was? I thought you were taking a shit. I didn't know what that was. Oh, is that what that was?
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what that was.
That's your Stallone?
Available for parties, bar mitzvahs, corporate events. But
Todd looks so beat down. He doesn't know what he signed up for when he got into we're going deep on these movies. We're talking about them here.
Yeah, man, we don't fuck around. It ain't bedtime.
Bro, I got notes about shout out at the NWA pod, my other show, in The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. There's a Bob Backlund versus Afa the Samoan match from the NWA happening.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's a crossover.
Being called by Vince McMahon, if I'm not mistaken.
And Jordy Verrill is loving it. He is loving it. So Creepshow was a big hit. It was probably the biggest hit of Romero's career, and led to a sequel 5 years later. For Creepshow 2, Romero actually took over scripting duties himself. He was adapting some stories by Stephen King, but he handed over the director's chair to his director of photography, Michael Gornick. And then a third film got released in 2007 by the rights holders that neither King nor Romero had anything to do with it creatively. It is, by all accounts, horrible. And Savini disowns it because he's like, I didn't have anything to do with that. It's awful. I haven't seen it because I've heard it so bad that I never bothered. And then, of course, last year, Shudder released a pretty critically acclaimed TV series also called Creepshow. And episodes of that were based on the works of Stephen King, but also Joe Hill, Joe R. Lansdale, people like that. And both John Harrison and Tom Savini helmed episodes of the series. Savini actually directs the very last segment of the series, which is based on a story by Joe Hill, who, of course, as Gary mentioned before, they met on the set to this movie, which is kind of cool. Almost awesome. 40 years later.
Just Greg Nicotero and Joe Hill and Tom Savini and all those people work on the later Creepshow show. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Nicotero is the showrunner. I know he directs the first episode.
Yeah, that's right. I think he is. He is the showrunner and directed the first one.
Yeah,
or no, 2 episodes according to. Sorry, I just pulled it up right here. He did The Finger and Gray Matter.
The Finger is super fun.
Yeah,
it's a super fun segment.
Well, let's get an overall opinion. Did Todd like this movie?
What do you guys think?
Apparently not.
Yeah, we don't know.
If I have to give it a thumbs up or thumbs down, I gotta go thumbs down.
God damn it, Todd!
Not a big fan of it.
Not a fan of Creepshow?
No, not really.
Todd hates horror. Todd is not a horror guy.
Oh man, just hearing Todd talk right now. You know what?
You're just further proving my theory that Todd is not a horror guy.
Well, Todd, you're not alone.
That he is.
In that you probably didn't love this movie, and you're not alone in that, Justin, somebody needs a nap.
Time for our favorite new segment.
Our favorite new segment. I did it for this one too. I'm sorry. I got a few here real quick.
All right, let's hear it.
It's Mary Lou.
Todd needs a nap.
Todd, no, that's what I'm saying. He's not alone. Somebody needs a nap.
I do need a nap.
Mary Lou wrote in, gave it 1 out of 5 stars. Her subject line says 1 star.
Thank you.
Her whole comment is, DVD in good condition, movie terrible.
Please elaborate, Mary Lou.
No, that's all she's got. That's on Amazon.
Nope, that's it.
Faltright or something. His subject line says, I wish I'd never had to give this a star. He says, they say horror movies are a test of your wits and your endurance, and this movie does that, but not in the way you may have intended it to be. The acting is so diabolical. You begin to wonder, why the hell did you put your money to waste on a movie like this? The acting is so hilariously bad that when friends and family interrupt and start talking about, think I ought to mow the lawn tomorrow, what do you think, dear? You gladly give your opinion just so you can get away from the terrible film. Now, when you think of George Romero films, you think, oh, this might be good because of such classics as the Living Dead trilogy and Codename Trixie, the crazies to you and me, and the amiable Bruiser. But then
Bruiser's fucking terrible. What is it?
But then this just really tears your heart out. Again, I go back to the acting and how poor it is, but you've just got to see it to believe it. I mean, how do these actors, and I use the term loosely, sleep at night knowing that they made a turkey like this? Actually, I'm being cruel. Turkeys have better taste than to watch this tribe. Avoid at all costs. Please, I beg, don't submit yourself to this torture. Now, he did say you have to see it to believe it, but then also begs you not to watch it.
Yeah, that's mixed signals there, bud.
I got one more real quick. It's Windsong 92, subject line, Creepshow is the most saddest excuse for a horror movie. Okay, let's get started. This movie is not my thing. I thought parts of it were laughable and boring. I thought the acting was completely cheesy. I wanted it to get somewhere, but it never did. So the only story that made sense was the crate. That was it. Everything else was a drag. Now, the actors who started this movie knew better. There's Ed Harris, Stephen King, Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson, Hal Holbrook, Adrian Barbeau, and Tom Atkins. They should stick to movies people appreciate more. Have a standard. Well, that's all I have to say other than CREEPSHOW, more like crap show for sure.
Oh, man. Wow. Well, despite what those people think, CREEPSHOW was very successful. So in the immediate aftermath of its success, the Laurel Group, which, is Rubenstein and Romero's film production company, they developed an anthology TV series called Tales from the Dark Side. Really, kind of a fun little cheap, anthology series. It's pretty fun though. Ran from 1984 to 1988, and it actually spawned its own big screen continuation in 1990, which was directed by John Harrison. One of the biggest things I think, though, to spring from CREEPSHOW's success came in 1989. So when Hollywood saw how well this movie did, they snapped up the rights to actual EC Comics, the comics that inspired the movie, and created a TV show called Tales from the Crypt, which aired on HBO for 7 seasons and is still, fondly remembered today. I still revisit Tales from the Crypt episodes multiple times a year.
It's not on the stupid HBO app, though, right?
It's not. The Tales from the Crypt rights are super complicated. So unfortunately, it's not on like HBO Max or anything. Man, I wish they would figure that out so it'd be easier to watch, but it's not. But the DVDs are pretty cheap. You can buy the seasons pretty cheap. But CREEPSHOW honestly may have been the last big success of Romero's career. I mean, the next film he made was not very popular upon release, and we'll talk about that next week. It's because although it was not popular upon release, it's gone on to become, I think, one of his most well-regarded among fans. And that's where we'll pick up next week, of course, with that film, the third film in Romero's Living Dead trilogy, 1985's Day of the Dead. We're wrapping up the zombie movies for now.
For now. Because Romero wasn't wrapped up with zombie movies.
He thought he was.
He thought he was.
And then just when they thought he was out, they dragged him back in.
Yeah. He was
in like 2007 or something.
At a certain point, he finally was like, man, I need some money.
Yeah, zombies will pay the bills. But next week, we're talking about Day of the Dead, starring Joe Pilato of effects. So that should be fun. You guys can find out where to stream it on our website, cinemashock.net. If you go to the episodes on cinemashock.net, you can listen to all of these episodes for one thing. It's a one-stop shop. But I've also started putting links to all of the upcoming films that we're going to talk for like the next 4 weeks after each episode. And all of those links will give you the options of where to watch these streaming online, whether to stream on somewhere like Netflix or to rent through Amazon or Vudu or something like that. You'll be able to find them all on there. So, yeah. So go over to cinemashock.net and all that.
And let us know on the Twitter and on the Instagram what you like, what you don't like. If we're talking too much about a movie, if we're talking not enough, whatever. We're just like going in. Like Todd.
Do you think Todd's taste in movies sucks?
Yeah.
Let him know, Mr. Todd A. Davis.
He needs to wake up.
At Mr. Todd A. Davis. Todd, drink some coffee next time. Todd,
I might have to.
Todd, maybe next time you should not say you're a horror guy when you don't like fucking CREEPSHOW.
Yeah, it's a good point. I felt like that was a slam dunk, and then Tom was like, "No bueno on CREEPSHOW." No bueno.
Yeah.
But to each their own. You're allowed to have your own opinion. Are you with Todd? Do you hate CREEPSHOW? Are you with us? Do you love CREEPSHOW?
Do you have
think
good
it's
taste?
a Halloween tradition? By God, in my house, I think now. I think I just usually watch it every year.
I do too. It's a go-to. It's my go-to horror anthology. And we'll talk about other horror anthologies on the show, but I honestly think this is like the king of horror anthologies. I think this is the most consistent.
I think this is the one that any horror anthology that comes out from this one on, they all say they like CREEPSHOW.
And this was definitely not the first. And anthologies go back decades before this. But this is, I do think this is like, it's the most consistent probably of all horror anthologies in that every segment is pretty good to great. Even my least favorite is still pretty good. Whereas there are some horror anthologies where there are segments that are downright terrible and hard to get through.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hate on Todd, though, because he was with us on Knight Riders, and you thought we were all going to hate Knight Riders. And
I did,
we all loved Knight Riders. And I still, to this day, as we're recording this, think about Knight Riders. I think it's legitimately one of my favorite things I've ever seen, and I just want to go back and watch it.
I enjoy being surprised by you guys. I mean, I was surprised that Todd didn't like Creepshow.
I went and got one of the Brother Blue books, and
nice.
I've got another one coming soon.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
very cool.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, you want to tell our listeners where you can be found on the internet? I already said Mr. Todd A. Davis for all your hate mail.
Yeah, at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond.
I still don't know what that is.
I don't know what that is.
Guys, it's not rocket science. It's a Dungeons and Dragons website.
But is it like a social media thing?
You can connect with players and play online, but it's like a resource for all their materials.
But you can like friend somebody, like somebody can look you up and friend you.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I've never played Dungeons and Dragons.
I will not ever be on D&D Beyond, but I am This is Gary Horn on all the social medias. You can
I'm at Justin_Bishop. Follow the show at Cinema Shock at Cinema_Shock, I should say. Twitter and Instagram, or find us up there on Facebook. And that's all we got until next week.
I mean, some of you guys, just want to say, some of you guys have been super kind, and we respect and appreciate everyone that's listening to this show. We're trying to be, like Justin said in the website, a one-stop shop for like movie information of like, you're like, I just want to know about Creepshow. Like, that you can throw on this episode. That's all the shit you're going to need to know about Creepshow. You'll be like,
because I looked it all up and I found all of it, and I tried to convey it all in one spot.
So if you guys have any suggestions or movies you want to see, or tell us to keep it shorter, or whatever you want to do, let us know. We are open to your suggestions. We love all of you. But yeah, like Justin said, until next week, may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other.
I hate this part.
He's got that look in his eyes.
Johnny has the keys.
Do you think he'll pick a different one when we stop doing the Romero thing, or is
I think he's like forcing it to be a thing?
It's
going to be a thing.
Scary.
Yeah,
because be excellent to each other is a great send off. It's a great piece of life advice, and it came from the mouth of our Lord and Savior Keanu Reeves.
Listen, the more you hate
Johnny
on it,
has
the more
the keys.
I'm going to push that. I'm going to push that blade in a little further, twist it just a little bit harder.
Oh, it's real intense about that.
Hey guys, if you think Todd's sign off sucks, tweet him at Mr. Todd A. Davis, at us at Cinema_Shock, and let us know. And we'll
listen.
Matter of fact, send him suggestions.
Yeah, don't just tell me it sucks. Come to me with a solution.
Tell him something better. Anything better.
Tell me something better.
I'm behind you.
Where's my cake? How about that? Where's my cake? That's better.
This is the issue with modern political situations. If you're in such a political situation as us right now, come with solutions as well, and give Todd some other
not only criticisms but solutions.
Right, exactly. All right. Well, that's it.